We're talking about the abiding life of Christ, and that Christ has entered into me, the old man has been crucified, and yet I still remain in a body, and if I shut off the door to His life, I'll live out of my own strength, my soul power, my humanism, and I'll try to cope with life in the strength of myself. And so therefore we have to take up the cross daily and allow His life to flow through me. And that daily walk we call the abiding life. From John 15. You're born a branch in a vase, and every day you learn how to live while you die, and then one day He grafts you in, and His very life becomes your life, and it flows through you. And it's a very, very simple thing to get His life flowing. All we have to do to open the door to His life is say, I can, I can't, and the door opens. And whenever I say I can do something, the door is going to close. And God is constantly putting you in situations to reveal to you not what you can do, but what you can't do. So you'll open the door to His life and invite Him and come, and you can live a supernatural life. Now, I really like John 15, and of course that's the key passage for our ministry. And Andrew Murray, who said, again, that the worst heresy in the world is the constant emphasis on what we do for God and not knowing what God does for us. And I believe that Jesus was preparing us for that coming heresy also in His teaching when He taught about the vine and the branch. That He didn't want to leave being a teacher. He wanted to come back and be our very life. And I don't believe that Jesus is teaching imitation. He's teaching instead participation in His life. And He says something that's very interesting here, because He'll use parables, but in John 15 He doesn't say that I'm like a vine. He says that I am the vine. That every vine preaches and teaches Jesus. And if you want to know all there is to know about Him, just go out in a vineyard on a nice cool day and lay down and just look around, and it'll be amazing the things that you learn about Him. He's teaching that if I participate in Him, the fruit that I'm going to have is going to be natural. And in order to have that natural fruit, He's going to prune me. Have you ever heard Christians say this, and they do it, and they don't have a smile on their face at all when they do it, but they say this: God is pruning me. I'm just being pruned. I'm in a time of pruning. And what they're telling you then is that God is cutting away in them all the bad things in this pruning. But I discovered something interesting hanging around vineyards, that when you prune a vineyard and you prune the vine, you don't cut away the bad. The bad was cut away a long time ago. Do you know what you cut away? You cut away the good. You cut away the best. Because good is the enemy of the best. And what they cut away are the branches that bore the most fruit the year before. Because if you don't cut them away and let something new happen, what happens is that branch will take more sap and give less fruit each year. And at the end of 20 years, it's become its own huge branch, and it's giving 20 times less the fruit, and yet it's taking 20 times the sap out of the vine. And so I remember being in Knoxville, Tennessee, and in our little church there in the inner city, and they'd had a revival in 1919. And now this church only had about 35 people in it. And I was one of the only young guys in the men's Bible study. And I would go down with these old men, and we'd go down the stairs. They'd have their walkers and their canes, and they would show us the pictures every Sunday of the revival of 1919. And we'd go around the room and we'd look at these old men in these pictures from the revival. And they'd had, 500 people come to Christ or something. Now we're back down to 35. Do you know that since 1919, at the same time of year, the same date, we were still having that revival? Well, you could look around and see the whole place was on fire, all right. And today it was taking 20 times the effort to do it, and it was giving absolutely no fruit. And one of the things that we don't recognize, that in this abiding life and living on the vine, He's going to prune away from you the things that were the best. And the reason He'll do that is, if He doesn't knock that off of you, you'll start trusting that, and that'll become the focus in your life. and and you're not allowing anything new to happen. And so this life is new every morning. It's fresh every morning. I really love living that way and letting Him prune things away and not living in systems, but living in a relationship. And it's very, very relaxed to live in the relationship. I shared this with some of you, but it was a lot of fun for me in that my kids normally don't travel with me. And the reason they don't travel with me is they've seen me over the years coming home with worms and diarrhea and growths on my face that nobody knows where they came from. And one time I remember in India, I was so exhausted, I went to sleep on a dirt floor in a village, and I was so much out of it that when I woke up, my head wouldn't pull away from the dirt. And I felt, and there was a big mound of mud here, and these ants had started building a village on the side of my head, and it was stuck to the floor. And so I came home with a big red rash. Another time I came home from traveling, and for about 6 weeks after I was home, out of the seams of my shirt, these maggots would hatch out. And these eggs had gotten laid in there somehow, so I'd be eating dinner with everybody, and this little thing would start crawling down my shirt. Well, your kids grow up looking at that, and you say, hey, you want to go out of the country? No, thanks. I had to laugh when we were in Africa one time, and we were eating the lunches that we had with the students. People were starving there. There wasn't a lot of food. And what they'd do is throw a cabbage in about a 55-gallon drum of water and boil it. And then that was our soup. And if you're lucky, somebody had a little dried fish or something else. And one of the things they love there is they'll burn the fields and wait for the mice to come running. And they're beating them with sticks, and they got this water boiling over here and throwing the mice into the hot water. And then you hear everyone crunching away as they're eating these mice with the fur and everything. Well, anyway, our dinner there is going to be this cabbage soup. And anyway, one of the fellows gets up to pray, and his prayer is this: Father, please forgive the hands that prepared this meal. And thank you for all of the spared lives. Amen. My dad and I laughed and laughed. I mean, what a prayer. Thank you for the spared lives. Well, anyway, I got my son to go with me, and he was going with me to Nepal. And, of course, it's the first time he's been out in the third world, and we're heading off to Nepal. And he likes a plan. He's organized. He's a thinker. He wants to know, what is the plan? What's our plan? And I said, well, the whole thing's organized. Well, who do you know there? I said, heaps of people. The whole thing's sorted out. I said, I'll give you the plan when we get there. And so we head off, and we lay over in Paris to get a little bit of a rest, and we get the rest. And he said, now again, who do you know over there? I said, heaps of people. And your plan, all organized. So we get into Calcutta. We lay over there, and he says, you got a plan? I said, oh, yeah. I said, everything's organized. And we're reading in the paper that, of course, Christianity's illegal there, and they just put a Dutch fellow in jail for 3 years for preaching there. And there's a lot of turmoil and those kind of things going on. And he said, how's all this working? I said, oh, the whole thing. I said, I've been doing it for years, mate. I said, the whole thing's sorted out, not a problem. So anyway, we land in Nepal, and we get there and get a ride into the ancient part of the city. I don't know how old this is. I mean, it goes way, way back. Some of these buildings would be a couple of thousand years old. And there's a lot of lepers on the street. And, of course, there's a lot of filth there and dirt and the rats and all these temples. And then one of the places you drive by is the Holy River, where they bring bodies from all over India to burn there. And they've got big stacks of wood going everywhere. They throw these dried bodies up there. And part of the ritual is to buy big chunks of butter. And they buy these huge things of butter, and they're smearing those on the bodies and burning those and then kicking the ashes down into the water. And in fact, one of my friends there said that he saw a cow take a drink out of that river and die in 20 minutes. And the place is crawling with monkeys everywhere. And these priests are down there acting like they're drinking the water, but they're just doing this, you know, the hypocrisy of the whole thing. And then there's a Hindu there sitting under a rock. Now, this is the first time my son has seen anything like this. He's sitting under a rock. He's a sadhu, and this rock has a big arch. And he's been sitting in the same place for 56 years. His legs are atrophied. And he's a sadhu, a teacher, and so I ask if I can ask him some questions, and I can. And he unties his hair and throws it out in front of him, and it goes about 15 feet. And then he unties his beard, and it goes out in front of him. And he hasn't cut his hair or his beard for 56 years. And I thought it'd be an interesting question, why do you do that? Because Europeans come from all over Europe to get the wisdom of these guys. And so I said, Sadhu, why do you have your hair that long, and why have you grown it? And he said, well, I've been sitting here 56 years, and it's my hobby. Well, I guess if you're that's deep. I had to write that down. It was his hobby. Can you imagine? I guess if you're just going to sit in the same place 56 years, you need a hobby. And that was his hobby. But anyway, we're looking at all this. We work our way back. We find an upper room. We're staying there. My son says to me, what's the plan? What are we doing here? I said, the whole thing's organized. So I went to work on the computer, and I'm writing things, and I'm getting some things done and all that. And I look over on the bed, and he's just kind of laying there like this. And I said, are you okay? And he said, I'm just trying to find a happy place. Well, it was quite a bit, but we get up in the morning, and he said, what's the plan? And I said, let me have your hands. So we need to pray before we go. And we just prayed this: Jesus, like a shepherd, lead us. Amen. He said, that's the plan? I said, well, anything else would be a waste of time. Why go through all of that? But I said, I'm going to tell you something. We're 5 weeks on this trip, and every night you're going to go to bed and you're going to say to me, this was the most amazing, fantastic day I've ever had in my life. Do you know at the end of every day for 5 weeks we went to bed and said this was the most amazing, fantastic day that we've ever had? You know what? I have a plan, and my plan is not to have a plan other than to keep my eyes on Him and to let the shepherd lead me as I go. And I put one foot in front of the other and say, Jesus, like a shepherd, you lead me. And we went out of there and we met somebody that knew someone else. And then we meet this fellow who is a Christian, and he runs his mission out of a leper colony. And he says, well, come to the leper colony to speak because the police aren't going to come to the leper colony. So we went to the leper colony. We started working there. Met another person, another fella. They started translating the book. We went back last year. We were close to the border of Tibet. We did a lot of work there. The work there has just been fantastic. All of it without a plan. See, when you're locked into your plan and your system, and that takes the place of living on the vine of something that really is alive, and you won't let Him cut those things away, nothing new is ever going to happen. And it's not that frightening in the life of faith. Jesus, like a shepherd, lead me. When my wife and I take our holidays now, I've even got her into it. We get up every morning and we just say, Jesus, like a shepherd, lead us. We don't know where we're going. And we have fantastic days together. In this relationship, it's living, and Jesus is not dead. I'm not going to say I have a God and live like I don't have a God. I have a God, and He's leading me. And it's one of the problems we have. Again, we want to know the will of God before we move. But if you know the will of God perfectly, congratulations, you're an unbeliever. He wants you to put one foot in front of the other, trusting Him. When I was a child and we had sheep on the farm, it was my job to go out and let them into the field that Grandpa told me they should go into today. And some of you have done this, but it's a lot of fun to let sheep out because we had different gates, and I would go to the gate to the field that they were going to get out into, and I would open the gate for them to come and stand there. And what the sheep would do is they'd get in two lines, one over here and one over there, and they would stare at you because they wanted to sneak past you and get away with something. And so what you'd do is you'd look over at this one, and then two would run here, and then you'd look over here and they'd stop, and two would go here. Then you'd look over here and these, and they were all getting away with something, weren't they? And I'd think to myself, you're only going where I'm letting you go. What are you getting away with? I opened the door and you went. And that's how I live my life, that He's the shepherd and He's opening the doors, and I put one foot in front of the other. I'm not stressed about it. I'm in a relationship with the shepherd, and Jesus, like a shepherd, lead me. And often I get the question with people when I'm way out in the outback somewhere, how in the world did you get here? Why are you here? And I'll often tell them I was just looking at a map or reading something, and the pasture looked good here. And I said, Jesus, like a shepherd, would you lead me? As I'm on the vine, he's going to cut away the systems that I trust in, the things that bore fruit last year, and keep me in this living dynamic where his life is flowing through me, and the shepherd is leading me every day. And do you know he's never going to let go of me? Because he's got too much invested in me. When I was grafted into the vine reached out and rewarded my pathetic attempt with a force 1,000 times greater to hold me in. I've got a friend of mine who, when I'd met him, he'd just lost $180 million. And that was back in the late 80s when they had the oil embargoes, and a lot of people in Texas lost a lot of money. And he was telling me that he was talking to his friends, and they were all in the same place, in the same boat. And his friend that owed the banks $350 million was talking to him. And he was into the banks for about $200 million. And his friend said to him, what are you going to do? And he said, well, I'm pulling my assets together. I'm selling this. I'm getting rid of that. I'm trying to hold this together, get rid of that building, and try to get this money. And then I've got some cash over here, and I got stuff out of the country, and I'm bringing it back in, and I'm trying to satisfy all these bankers. And the fellow looked at him and said, you know, you're an idiot. You're working yourself to death. And let me tell you a secret. The banks got so much invested in us, they can't let us go down the tubes. Now, if you want to work yourself to death and lose everything, you will. But he said, what I did is I went to the bank and said this, you don't patch this up and help me out, I'm going bankrupt on the whole $350 million. So now what are you going to do to help? Do you know that my friend went ahead and worked all the thing and went bankrupt? And his friend today is a billionaire. They couldn't let him go down the tubes. $350 million is a lot. But today, as you sit here, you have Christ himself dwelling in this earthen vessel. How much has God invested in you? How much is really in you? What kind of treasure is in you? I don't want to die without the revelation of what it means that Christ is in me. But today, everyone in this room has Christ in you, and there's so much invested in you. Do you think he's going to let you go down the tubes? Do you think he's going to let you go away? Do you think he's not going to keep working all things together for good in your life? And so there's so much invested in there that we can rest and just say, like a shepherd, you lead me. And it's living. It's a relationship. My mother always kept plastic fruit in the house. And as you noticed over the years, plastic fruit looks more and more and more real. And I got tricked that many times when I would go by and I would grab a piece of plastic fruit and think I was going to eat something. Do you know if you go to the factory where they make plastic fruit, it's hot and it's loud and it smells. But if you go to a vineyard, it's cool and it's quiet and it's calm because it's the real thing. In Christianity, if you're trying to manufacture the things of God and manufacture the fruit of God, you're hot and you're loud and you smell and you're angry. But if you've learned the secret of abiding and just simply getting up in the morning and saying again, today is not a day where humanity should rule, but today is a day for divinity. You come and be the divine and you live through me. Then you'll have a natural fruit, and you'll notice in the Christian that does that they're always quiet, they're always cool, they're always calm, and as Paul says, there's coming from them a fragrant aroma. Something that's very, very beautiful because they're quietly abiding in him. And as you do that, Matthew 7 says, a good tree will bring forth good fruit. In 2 Corinthians 9:8, that you'll abound in every good work. Then in Galatians 6:10, you'll do good. In Colossians 1:10, you'll be faithful in every good work. You'll be fruitful in every good work. In Hebrews 13, it says you'll be perfect in every good work. And what makes your work good and perfect is not the work itself, but it's the actual source of that work. Now we have Christ in us, and He's our life. And that's a revelation to us. And it's a revelation that we grow in. So what we mentioned the other day is that when you're holding a baby boy, you're holding a man, but you don't have the revelation of it yet. So you're complete in Christ, and if you're complete in Christ, there isn't anything that I have that you need. You're complete. But the revelation of that is going to come to you slowly as you go through this process of day by day taking up the cross, tripping up, moving back into the flesh, back into your humanity, back into the expression of the flesh, becoming miserable, and going back to Him again. I like this story that they told in India. And actually, I have to say where I got it. It's out of the National Enquirer. You know, we all find those magazines shocking, and how could anybody write that kind of piffle? But when we're standing in the grocery store line, we're all reading them like mad to see what it is and to see what it says. So I had to read this one story because it says missionary couple finds wolf boy. And what the story is about is that there's a missionary couple and they find a boy that's running naked with wolves. And they adopt the boy and they bring him home. And they say that it's a terrible, terrible experience having this boy in the house because they're trying to convince him that he's not a wolf, that he's a boy. And what they'll do is they'll have him sitting at the table, they'll be trying to feed him, and all of a sudden the cat will come by and he'll jump off the table and go chase the cat and be growling and snarling at the cat. Well, the boy said later on, you thought it was rough on me, rough on you, you should have been me. Because I'm sitting at the table, you're making me sit there with humans, but everything in me makes me feel as though I'm a wolf. And you feed the dog and I want the dog food. I want to chase the dog away. And the couple said that they struggled with this boy for about 5 years, and they were just living with an animal, trying to convince him that he wasn't an animal, he was a boy. And one day he said he was looking in the mirror, and he'd been looking at the people, and all of a sudden there was a revelation, an understanding that he really must be one of these people and not a wolf. And as he looked at that and it began to soak in, he said that he had to make a choice. I'm going to go against the wolf feelings that I have, and I'm going to begin to live what I must be, which is a boy. And as we look at our mirror, as we look at the scriptures, who does it say that we are? And it says that I'm a child of God, that I'm His righteousness, that I'm a royal priest, that He dwells in me, that I'm the temple of God. And at some point, I have to look at that and say, is that true or not, in spite of everything that I'm feeling, and begin to walk then in what I really am, and to say no to it. Now, it was interesting because at the end of the article, they'd ask him if he still had any problems with it years later, and he said, you know, the only time I have any problems is when I go by a zoo and I see a bunch of wolves. And all of a sudden, something is stirred in me. And we've talked about that, how like situations can stir up the old past to us. But it's a process of walking in this. Now, let's go back to relationships and what we were talking about when we began our sessions the other day. We wanted to look at relationships in a little different way. And I wanted to get a good foundation before we started into relationships. And that foundation now is that I see God in everything around me. And when something takes place, the first thing I ask myself is, what is God working in me? I don't try to get you to change so my flesh life or self life is more comfortable, do I? And so I believe that you need to be offended until you're offended. And when you're offended, you'd rather talk about the person who offended you than what it did to you and how you surrendered your peace and His presence to that person and situation. So we're always blame-giving others, and we're never growing up. And I wanted to lay the right foundation, because what I've discovered is, in relationships, people don't discuss things, they just debate who's the worst. And if we can get the foundation right, then we can begin to have discussions. Now, in abiding life and putting my focus on Christ, that doesn't mean that I now avoid issues. But if I'm really abiding, it'll put me in the very center of issues, but I can deal with the real issue. You know, one of the things that I'm not for is people covering up the problems in their relationship under their spirituality. And just saying, well, I better look to Jesus. When I look to Jesus, it doesn't matter what my kids are doing. Well, it does matter what your kids are doing, but you're right about this. Look to Jesus first and let His life flow so you have the wisdom of God in dealing with your kids before you ever move into it. So we've been looking then at getting our foundation right before we start talking about relationships. And we said that you carry with you into every relationship 2 invisible bags. In one bag is your uniqueness, how God made you, and the other bag is your past life or your self-life. The problem is we start our relationship at a point of oneness, and collisions begin to take place between these bags that make us spread apart. So here's a typical collision between Betty and I that I never understood, and I wish I would have understood it earlier. She's more of a thinker, and I'm more of a feeler and a doer. Now, a thinker is an obsessive person. They can only think of one thing at a time. And so they start thinking of something, and it's like this pen. What they'll do is pick it up and look at it and look at it and look at it and examine it and examine it and examine it, and before you know it, it's all they see. And one of the things you got to watch out for as a thinker is you'll take some little thing and be obsessing on it until you're ready to commit suicide. Well, I understand that it's a huge thing for you. You can't even see the rest of the room. You can't go out of the house anymore. You're wiped out. Well, throw the thing down. It isn't that big. And yet when a thinker does a task, they're all obsessed with it. So I come home at night, and my definition of love as a feeler is to give somebody a hug. Betty's definition of love as a thinker is to do something little and special for you. So I come in the house, and I'm looking for Betty, and I'm going to give Betty a big hug to show her how much I love her. And I'm looking around for Betty. Well, where did Betty go? I need a hug. You give me 100 hugs, I need 101. I got to find Betty. Betty's in the back room, and she's sitting there thinking, Mike will be home tonight. What could I do for him? I know what I'll do for him. I'll make his favorite chocolate pie. But do I have the chocolate for the pie? Do I have the nuts for the pie? Do I have the sugar for the pie? Do I have everything to make the pie? I do have everything to make the pie. I'll make a pie. Must make pie. Must make pie. And she leaves the bedroom obsessed on this pie. All she sees is making the pie, and she's headed into the kitchen, down the hallway. Must make pie. Must make pie. And I'm coming toward her to get my big hug. Does she even see me? No, all she sees is the pie. And I get to her, and she shoves me away to get into the kitchen to make the pie. And I'm standing there against the wall saying, why does the woman hate me? What did I do to her? And we just had a collision in our uniqueness and in our personalities that's caused us to spread apart. And those things happen daily with couples because we don't understand them. Now, the next thing that happens is we can have collisions in our flesh life. And so again, I had a mother who would often not talk to me, and I'd say something to her and she'd walk off. And now when Betty's preoccupied and I say something to her and she walks off, what does that stir up inside of Mike? What kind of feelings does that stir? And the thing is, Betty isn't saying I hate you and you're not interesting or any of that, because a thinker, the biggest playground in the world is between their ears. If there's a pause, they're off thinking and obsessing about something. And you can talk to them and they just have this look. You could take your hanky out and wipe the drool off of their face after a while. They're just staring. And so that takes place in a collision, and what happens then is I spread apart a little farther. Do you know that we get married believing that we know a person and we don't know a thing about them? We think we know them, but we don't know them. We're viewing them from our personality, their behavior from our personality. We're attaching motives to their behavior, and we're also viewing them from our past. We don't have a clue who we married. I can promise you, after 1 year of marriage or 5 years of marriage, you don't know who you've married, but you've been making a list trying to understand them because you hate the unknown. And you've been making the list from your own shoes. And we spread and spread and spread, and a normal relationship continues to spread. What we'll do is take a break and look at the end result of this spread and what happens. So let's take 5.